It's another week in the games industry, and it's another week of layoffs. So we have some very concerning news following yesterday's news that Supermassive, creators of Until Dawn and the Dark Pictures anthology, had layoffs, that Sony itself is now having layoffs. 900 people will be laid off this week at various studios, including London Studio, Insomniac, Naughty Dog, and Guerilla. These are part of a restructuring that they're doing to sort of reconfigure their live service efforts and to reconfigure their strategy going forward. Head of PlayStation Studios Herman Hulst had the following to say, quote, "Our goal at PlayStation Studios has always been to make the best games for PlayStation fans, and our global community of studios represent some of the most creative and talented teams within the gaming industry. PlayStation 5 is in its 4th year, and we are at the stage where we need to step back and look at what our business needs. At the same time, our industry has experienced continuing and fundamental change which affects how we all create and play games. Delivering the immersive, narrative-driven stories that PlayStation Studios is known for, at the quality bar that we aspire to, requires a reevaluation of how we operate. Delivering and sustaining social online experiences allows PlayStation gamers to explore our worlds in different ways, as well as launching games on additional devices such as PC and mobile, requires a different approach and different resources. To take on these challenges, PlayStation Studios had to grow. We have brought brilliant and successful studios into our family. We've invested in new technology and partnerships. We have recruited talent from across our industry and beyond." And finally, he ends with, "PlayStation Studios will continue to be a creator-led organization driven by evolving our beloved franchises and bringing new gameplay experiences of the highest quality to our fans." So a lot of this is just corporate speak, which you would expect from Herman Hulst. In the context of even just last week's announcement of PlayStation exploring the PSVR 2 headset working on PC, it seems obvious that Sony is moving away from being directly involved in PSVR 2's success as a flagship, first-party peripheral or accessory to what is their core strategy of selling games on PlayStation 5. Making something like PSVR 2 compatible with PC is great for the users of that headset, but it makes even more sense when you expect that you will no longer be developing first-party software directly or engaging with third parties outside of special contracts you may find useful for the platform. It makes sense now that the existing PSVR 2 titles in first party, which are not many, will migrate to PC for further sales. But beyond that, I don't expect Sony is going to be investing more money into PSVR 2 as a platform, which is unfortunate because the device had a lot of promise given the technology behind it. But I think for them, these layoffs are pretty in line with the other layoffs we saw with Microsoft and Ubisoft and Bungie, which is that these companies are trying to refocus on what their core businesses are and what makes them money. We've seen companies like Ubisoft cancel a lot of games internally and sort of refocus back on what makes them money, which is Rainbow Six Siege, the Assassin's Creed franchise, Far Cry. Smaller titles like Immortals Phoenix Rising, which I loved, had its sequel canceled. So these are not new decisions for the industry, especially within the last year and a half, but it's still sad to see more people are losing their jobs because the human cost of this is much greater than the cost to these businesses. This reporting comes via Jason Schreier that a Twisted Metal live service game was also canceled, which was in development at UK-based Firesprite. Firesprite was a studio that previously worked on the Horizon Call of the Mountain PSVR 2 title. Additionally, London Studio, who worked on original PSVR 1 titles, also closed for good following these layoffs. They are done. And it wasn't just studios like London Studio or Firesprite that were hit with layoffs. These outside, what many would consider the core first-party studios getting laid off. We see layoffs at Insomniac, creators of Spider-Man, Naughty Dog, creators of The Last of Us, and Guerilla, creators of Horizon. And these are three of PlayStation's most prolific and most profitable studios, so it's clear that these layoffs are just as much about reducing costs as they are about re-strategizing what PlayStation decides to focus on going forward. Now, it doesn't appear that these layoffs have hit Bungie, who is currently in trouble with regards to their forecasting for revenue. Now, obviously, the final shape will do a lot for potentially juicing that number back up, but with the way that these numbers are financially reported for fiscal year ends, it's unclear if the release on June 4th is going to allow them to account a lot of that money before their fiscal ends, likely in Q2 calendar year of this year. Now, we know that PlayStation has incubated 5 plus, almost 10 different projects related to Horizon, so seeing layoffs like Guerrilla does seem odd given that that franchise is a core focus for PlayStation, but Jason does confirm in a reply to another anonymous poster that the Horizon Online game is not in jeopardy and that game is going forward. When Herman Hulst talks about reevaluating how they operate, it's clear that they emphasize PC and mobile as platforms that they're going to focus on. Now, we've obviously seen with Helldivers and their currently announced live service games that these are all coming to PC, no doubt, and I would imagine a lot of them will even have mobile ports that'll make them compatible with modern day phones. Sony is trying to straddle the line between operating their business in a healthy manner with increased margin while simultaneously trying to deliver their first-party titles and also create live service games that will help them fund first-party and other things. These games are not cheap. Even the live service games, I would imagine, are well within the hundreds of millions of dollars to create. And beyond just creating the initial product that you offer to people, you have to support these games for years to come. So it's clear that they have a lot of internal issues right now with managing all their studios and managing their budgets. London studio, who was shut down today, working on an online co-op game set in a fantasy London setting. So that project will never see the light of day. We'll likely never hear anything about it, at least not for a few years. I would imagine maybe concept art will get leaked, but games like that will just never become known quantities. Herman did speak to delivering immersive narrative-driven stories, doubling down on creating first-party titles that matter to their core fan base. We've seen that PlayStation 5 has been selling faster than the PS4 did, and it has certainly less first-party games and less critically acclaimed first-party games. So the commitment to these first parties seems typical, but when you look at the business reality of what's making Sony money, it's not these first-party games, at least not in the way that third-party has. There was a Twisted Metal live service game that was also canceled as a result of these layoffs. It seemed to me that there was some intention between PlayStation Studios continuing with Season 2 of their show on Peacock and releasing a live service game. It seemed from the get-go that PlayStation Studios' sort of modus operandi has been to sort of synergize with what the games side of the business is creating. The Last of Us Online would have made sense to release during a Season 1 or a Season 2 of The Last of Us HBO show. I'm sure the idea behind the Twisted Metal live service game was to release that alongside one of the seasons of the show, which did, just surprisingly, get decent reviews during Season 1, so I would expect we'll see a Season 2 of that show, but with no game, it makes you wonder what the point of making the show is. Obviously, I'm sure it's profitable for them to make the show, but I think the idea behind PlayStation Studios on the TV and movie side is to synergistically create projects that will sort of allow the parts of the games and the parts of the movies and TV shows to create a synergy that is greater than the sum of the individual projects. In the same way that something like Nintendo, where it sells its games and it sells its merchandise and it sells other licensing to create a larger business and a larger sort of cultural relevance to its properties and its IP than just the singular instances of creating things. I think the reality of these layoffs is that outside of delivering PC support this year, I think Sony is signaling that they are not intending to continue with PSVR 2, probably post 2024. And I would imagine sometime this year or sometime beginning next year, we're going to stop seeing PSVR 2 have a presence at some of these showcases and some of these state of plays. Jim Ryan was recently at London Studio visiting during his sort of farewell tour, making the rounds of all these studios he had worked at. So it's really unfortunate to see the juxtaposition between that sort of public-facing goodbye and the layoffs. It's certainly true that Sony did not want to have the new CEO come in and make these layoffs and sort of tarnish the optics of that new leadership. So it makes sense that Jim Ryan would be the one to do it. But it's unfortunate, again, the human cost of these layoffs. These layoffs come off the heels of what was yesterday around 90 workers being laid off, so 10% of this at Supermassive Games. Supermassive are the original creators of Until Dawn, which is getting a remake from PlayStation Studios, and The Quarry, among other games in the Dark Pictures anthology. The timing of this news also is quite curious. Final Fantasy VII Rebirth comes out in just a day and a half now, although if you're in Japan, it's about a day. So it makes sense that the intention here is to give this news as little time to breathe as possible and as little airtime as possible, because once Final Fantasy VII Rebirth comes out, the news cycle will likely shift to reviews of that, content related to that, the success of that game, which for Sony, being a third-party exclusive game, it's going to likely shift the narrative for them. Don't want to give news like this a chance to breathe. They don't want to be seen unfavorably with regards to laying off staff or being looked at with some kind of weakness by laying off staff. So these layoffs also make a bit more sense too when you consider comments by Hiroki Totoki from the last financial call this last month, where he was making comments regarding game budgets and getting things in line and speaking to the mismanagement of resources by leadership at some of these studios, which many believed he was directing a bunch of leadership specifically, but he obviously did not name anybody in particular. Again, in hindsight, it makes sense that layoffs like this were coming, although I don't expect anybody thought these were going to come as soon as they did. It's unfortunate that developers and publishers and people in marketing and brand teams, programmers and level designers, all of these different folks who have specialized skills in creating games but don't make any of these business decisions are the ones that have to pay the price for what is certainly decisions made by leadership and executives both at Sony Interactive Entertainment and the individual studios themselves that have led to this decision where the money stops making sense to be spent on projects, and they decide that in canceling with the projects, they have nowhere to put these devs and nowhere to put these people who work in the sort of the publishing apparatus of PlayStation. So it's really unfortunate to see this. I, like many, am hoping that this will end at some point during this year. But I have a feeling these will continue well into 2025, where money, until it becomes cheaper for corporations to finance via low interest loans, will continue to contract and continue to refocus their efforts on a smaller number of projects and a smaller number of games that they believe will have a higher potential for profit and success in the market. PlayStation recommitting to PC and mobile during the comments made by Herman Hulst today, again reinforcing that they don't see the business as just PlayStation, despite Kenichiro Yoshida talking to it as the core product. So it'll be interesting to see what gets announced at this year's showcases following these layoffs. There certainly is a dearth of first-party titles on the platform, so when Herman Hulst talks to refocusing on the immersive experiences they're known for, it makes you wonder which games he's referring to when so few have come out and so few have been announced. So, sad day. I'm sure this will take some time for us to all process, given that the ramifications for this are not completely seen now. But that's going to do it for me, guys. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.